Hello, welcome to More Tools and Sense, the show that's been filling my shoes with molten metal since 2019. Today we're going to be working on the Studebreaker and there's a lot to do. I'm going to finish the floor pans, install the brakes, the steering, the clutch, everything that's needed in order to roll out across the wasteland. So let's get started. Okay, so yeah, there's a big hole in the floor, and I need to fix that, but before I do, I want to sort out the pedals. Now, the brake and the clutch need to be installed, and normally you would just bolt them through the firewall. You could even get a pre-made kit to do that, and that would be easy. But I really like these old pedals. They came off the Studebaker, and I want to use them again. Now, they have kind of a weird setup. They actually pivot, and they go up and down like this, and they actually go through the floor, which means I'm going to need something right here for them to pivot on. And in the original car, that's part of the frame, and it's kind of welded in there. So I guess I'm gonna have to go get it. Well, in hindsight, it would have been much easier to cut a larger chunk out of the frame and bolt that in, but grinders and welders are almost as good as a time machine. I somehow managed to lose the round bottom key that holds this assembly together, but again, grinders fix all problems. Now before I install the master cylinder, I want to make the push rod that's going to actuate it. It'll be much easier to adjust the location of the master cylinder in order to fit the push rod than it will be to make a different length push rod. Now that the push rod is done, I can make the bracket that's going to hold the master cylinder. I also had to clip the edge of it so it would fit close to the frame. Alright, so I had everything all together and the pedals are ready to go, but then I realized that I can't just weld this to the body because there's no cushion underneath, there's no body mount, and I don't want there to be one because this is where the pedals attach. So I'm just going to leave the pedals bolted to the frame and then have the body not connected. But to make it easier for everything to come apart, I am going to get rid of these rivets and replace them with 2 bolts so that this part of the pedal can come off, and then you can lift the whole body up without having to remove the pedal box or take any of this apart. Alright, well, I finally got my master cylinder for the clutch. You had to buy a whole kit. Made a little bushing to make this smaller. Now it fits the pin for the original one. Now I just need to make a bracket. Shorten this up, figure out where this line is going to go, maybe add an extra support here, and we should be good. And hey, look at that, the clutch actually works. And now with the pedals all done, it's time to do some more very exciting sheet metal work. I really love these little Cleco fasteners. They're really convenient if you want to weld something in place, but also you can install a piece of metal and then you can weld on adapters or take it apart and modify it, and then when you put it back, it'll still be installed in the same exact place. With the floor pan done, I needed to finish it off with this access panel. This is going to live above the two master cylinders, and I need to be able to get fluid in there. I opted to make it out of aluminum so it would be both easier to bend and manipulate, and also I could leave it unpainted and not having to worry about it rusting. Well, now that the floors are all sealed up and done, it's time to move on to something very, very important. Oh, big boys. Alright, so we got pedals, we got seats, shifters kind of where it's supposed to be, and I don't fall through the floor. But before I actually install these seats, I want to get a steering wheel installed, and that way I'll know all the alignments and make sure I'm sitting in the right spot. Well, I'm going to be using the stock Dodge steering column, but it's going to need a lot of modifications. It doesn't need these modern amenities like an ignition lock cylinder, and it certainly won't need that handle that operates the pernal. My shop assistant here is helping me reassemble everything, and then we can cut some clearance and try the first test install. So this might be a little close. I could be maybe an inch further back, but the steering wheel is all up in my business. So I think we're going to have to shorten it, and that's also going to make it so that hopefully I can bolt it underneath the dash without too much trouble. Now, shortening the overall length of the steering column is a bit of a job. It has a collapsible crush zone in the center, and I wanted to keep that because obviously safety is a large concern for this build. But in order to do that, I needed to cut out all of the solid sections on both ends and then still try to keep the collapsible center section.
Now before I actually install this steering column, I wanted to remove the dashboard, rip out all of the old wiring, clean it up, and make sure that any superfluous junk is thrown away. I also took the time to find a replacement light bulb for it. Switch still works.
We got brake, we got clutch, we got steering. Now I just need the vroom vroom loud noise pedal. Do have to put all the gauges back. I can actually use the oil pressure gauge. Still functions. Don't know if I'm going to be able to make the speedometer work. But that's going to be a problem for later.
With the steering wheel done, I can get back to the original job of installing the seats. They're a little too low, so I'm going to add these brackets to lift them up. And I also want to install larger brackets underneath, which are both going to act as body mounts attaching to the frame and help shore up the floor pans. With the seats and interior done for now, it's time to get back to working on those brakes. Everything's been installed, but I'm going to need things like lines and fittings. And for those, of course, I'm going to need specialty tools to be able to make these brakes actually function and do something. Well, the front brakes were actually in pretty good condition, so I think I'll be able to reuse them. Just going to give these discs a very quick and very professional resurfacing.
Alright, so this is the proportioning valve. It determines how much brake fluid goes to the rear and how much goes to the front. We're not going to use that. I'm going to do something weird and kind of stupid, and what I'm going to do is hook the master cylinder up exclusively to the front brakes, so that when I push the pedal, I'm only operating the two discs up front. That's because I don't have a power booster, there's no room for it, and I want to be able to put all of that force into just these two brakes and hopefully get a little bit less pedal effort and good stopping power. But what about rear brakes? Am I going to have rear brakes? Yes, I am. They're going to be hand operated, and I'm only going to be using this to power the rear brakes. Now, that way, if I want to do burnouts, put my foot on the pedal, and I'm only stopping the front tires like line lock. If I want to do power slides, I pull the handle, and I'm only using the rear brakes. Now, since this is just a show truck, that's great. If I was going to try to drive this on the road, this would be stupid and really dangerous. But you know what? Who cares? Calipers finally have fluid inside of them. It took me forever to get the master cylinder and everything working because I had to bench bleed the master cylinder, I had to vacuum, pull fluid into the lines. I couldn't get anything to come through the caliper, and that was just because it was full of gunk inside the bleeder screw. So what you gotta do is take the bleeder screw all the way out and then pump the pedal up with as much pressure as you can get, and eventually it will shoot brake fluid all over your wall, and that means it's clear. But now that it's done, you can put in these speed bleeder screws, which have a little check valve in them. And then when you pump the pedal, bubbles come out, but they don't go back in. And then you don't need any help, you just pump it until it comes through just fluid. Super easy.
With the brakes done, I'm going to turn my attention back to some more sheet metal work. The steering column needs a place to bolt in, and since I was unable to shorten it enough to get it to line up with the firewall, I need to make this little bump out, and at the same time I also need to seal up this big hole in the firewall.
Alright, so I still need to make 2 more body mounts for the front, and if I don't do that, then the whole front grille of the car is going to be flopping up and down. It's going to look like that hand puppet of a shark that your preschool teacher had that she thought was super adorable, but it was actually kind of terrifying. Anyway, we're going to use some of this 2-inch tubing, and we're going to make some body mounts to prevent any kind of slop from happening.
Now when you're making these body mounts, it's going to be very important that you use captive nuts. This is going to make it a lot easier to install the body onto the frame. A good way to install these is to put them in backwards, realize your mistake, cut them out, flip them around, and reinstall them again.
Alright, well, we've got seats, we've got steering, we've got pedals, clutch, brake, that all works. I've got everything I need to drive this around except for running motor. So the next thing we're going to do is take it all apart. Because while yes, I'm going to leave this thing rusty as all get out, I do want to get some paint underneath of the body, in between the frame, all that stuff I just welded. I prefer if this thing doesn't fall apart completely the first time I drive it through a puddle. So we're going to pull the body off, paint underneath, and get the frame welded. There's a couple of spots I can get to easier, drill some holes, got to do a couple of little things. So let's get on that and get this thing back together so we can make this engine run. Well, that's all the time we have for today's episode of More Tools Than Sense, but make sure you subscribe because you won't want to miss the next one. We are finally going to be turning gasoline into noise.
Hopefully.
It's not pretty hard.
Oh yeah, it is stuck on that little lip there.
I can't.
All right, here.